Hello and welcome to the Sideline Live podcast. My name is Orla Keeling and I am the host of the podcast, where every week we bring you a brand new episode with guests ranging from Olympic champions to local heroes, coaches, support staff and anybody involved in the world of sport. Each week we will dive into different topics, including current affairs in sport, identity, skill, mindset, coaching, and also shine a light on those flying under the radar. So tune in every week for brand new episodes, new stories, and new insights you've never heard before. Okay, delighted to be joined by Tony Óg Regan. Tony, thanks a million for joining the podcast.
Orla, thanks a million for having me on.
Give us your elevator pitch for the listeners who don't know who you are.
I'm Tony Óg Regan. I suppose I'm from a place called Raham, Newcastle in Galway City. I grew up there and have lived there most of my life. Currently married to Michelle with 3 kids. During my younger days, I started playing hurling and Gaelic football when I was 6 or 7 years of age, and that gravitated into representing Galway at hurling at underage level and senior level for about 15 years. During that time, I went to study commerce in NUIG and went on to become a chartered accountant and had some struggles during that time before eventually moving on into a different space altogether in terms of high performance coaching and leadership coaching and health and well-being after completing a master's at the end of my hurling career. And I've worked in that space with, multiple All-Ireland winning teams over the last 10 years and multiple business teams as well. And it's something I really enjoy, helping others kind of maximize their potential and achieve more through a healthy and sustainable peak performance practices.
Very good. You've also written a book, just out. It's only released, I think, in January. Was it this year?
Yeah, I often forget about the book at the end of these intros, but yeah. No, it was probably a 2-year project based off, wanting maybe to share some of the challenges and the learnings and successes I've had both as a player at elite level, but also, in a professional context as well in terms of sports psychology, performance psychology, health and well-being, and obviously being a person off the field as well in terms of trying to navigate a career change from, accountancy and business into, coaching and coaching at an elite level as well. So I thought there was a lot of good environments I've been around and good experience I've been around that would help people maybe navigate challenges better than I did at times, and helping them to overcome the mental obstacles more so than maybe physical obstacles that we often put in our own way.
Speaking of environments, it's something that comes up pretty much in every episode. I don't always discuss it with guests, but I was talking to Claire O'Sullivan a while ago, basketball player, and she spoke about the environment in her school, and her school would have won multiple All-Irelands during her time, but have continued that success. And even I was chatting to Gary Sice about Cara Finn, and it all comes back to the environment. Like, when we look at families and clubs and culture, the environment that is created really, it doesn't mean you're destined for success, but there's a pretty big clue there.
Yeah, and I think they're putting anything as much as 70 to 80% of our behaviours down to the environment that we're in. So, if we're in very harsh, critical environments that don't have, the right people or the right resources in them, there's less chance of having, highly successful and sustainable, repeatable success over a period of time. So, it's as simple as, if you have a fruit bowl in the kitchen table or you have a sweet bowl in the kitchen table, what are you tending to do? Like 80% of your behaviors is you'll pick up the sweet if there's sweets in that bowl, whereas if there's fruit, you're 80% more likely to pick up fruit. So, how we are designing those environments to, maximize people's potential that they're able to, flourish and thrive both personally and professionally or sporting wise, is important. And you have to put a bit of thought into, creating those environments both from a physical context, a social context, and a cultural context as well to allow people to get the best out of themselves. And if we're only just focused on the mental skill side of it or the coaching, technical, tactical side of it, you're missing a big piece in terms of what influences behavior change. And it is a really important thing to consider both for sporting organizations, business organizations, and even people in their own home environment as well. That a lot of people work from home as well. Is that environment helping you to focus, feel in control, perform and execute your tasks and your role to the best of your ability. They're all considerations we have to look at.
Speaking about culture and environment, I'll throw a bit of a scenario, a couple of maybe during the chat, a couple of scenarios at you. But for a kid or a parent that's listening that has a child or they're involved in a club or a school where they don't feel the environment is as positive as it could be, and not that they don't want to change it, but if they're in that environment and they feel like it's not maybe positive, what advice do you give them? When they're in a club, that they don't find positive, just in terms of focusing on themselves. Like what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I suppose as a parent, I would think a lot of coaches are open to feedback in terms of, what we do well and what we can improve on. And, if you build that relationship with the coach, I think, you could say, first off, these are some observations. If you're open and willing to take on some feedback, I really like this in terms of your approach with my child or other children. And I think it's very good from that aspect. And, just from my own observations from studying culture and environment or been around other clubs, these might be some improvements that you could consider that might help it make it even better. And I think you're having a great conversation then, the coach and yourself, and that's going to either stimulate no change or it might stimulate some change, and either way you'll have a decision to make. If changes start to happen, it's a win-win, and if they don't start to happen, well, then you have another choice to make, whether, do I persist with this and hope it changes, or do, I move my child to another age grade, or maybe another environment that they'll get the best out of themselves and enjoy their participation in sport. So that's maybe my perspective on how you could view that.
In terms of your career, one of the things that stood out to me from an early age, you had great self awareness and you kind of went for specialist help with skill acquisition and stuff like that. I know your dad kind of played a factor as well in terms of his background too, but am I right in thinking that sometimes elite athletes are nearly like entrepreneurs, that they spot the gaps and the differences and go after and seek help? Like, even I'm thinking of Kate O'Connor, who's a heptathlete at the moment, and I remember her interview. She's so many individual events brought into one, and going and training with different people, and it kind of resonated with me when I read your book about the specialist help. Am I right in thinking that sometimes the best athletes are nearly have an entrepreneurial mindset of it?
Yeah, I think you have to have that hunger to say, where can I improve, and that openness. And go back to environment again. When dad would have brought home, whether it's hurdle jumps or, a different type of football, or, a weight or whatever it might be, I'd always be exploring, like, how could this maybe help me? And I might try it out in the garden shed, or I might try it out the side of the house. And you could be banging a sliotar off the wall or a Gaelic football off the wall, doing hurdles or ladders or whatever it might be to improve speed, quickness, or whatever. So, bit by bit, you're noticing, geez, I'm a bit quicker off the mark here when I'm training, or I'm a bit more physical in the tackle, and this stuff is working, and maybe I'm getting, ahead of my competitor in those aspects. So I think, is it Kobe or LeBron talked about the world being a library in terms of, I see now, sleep is something I can improve on. That's the library I'm looking at to improve performance, and meditation can be another part of that library that improves performance, and getting supportive coaches around me can be another thing that improves that performance. And he saw that, life was kind of an opportunity, and all these things were opportunities to enhance his life or enhance his performance by 1%. And, I think if you want to get the very top in whatever profession it is, it's to, I can't be the best in business, if I'm an accountant, at marketing my business, at, meeting clients all the time, at, selling whatever it might be. So, we do have to have different departments that drive different areas to accelerate growth. And the same way as well, I don't think any athlete does it on their own. I think you have good S&C coaches that support you. You have great nutritionists that support you. You have good performance psychologists that support you. You have managers or coaches that can develop you from a tactical, technical side of it as well. And it's to be open to those supports, and that can really, that growth mindset towards these things can really accelerate progress in my mind, when you're, saying that I haven't it all figured out. I know what I'm potentially good at, but I'd like to strengthen these areas as well. And I know these are things that maybe hold me back in pressure situations, and I know I need to get better at them to, perform better at a more consistent basis.
Mm. Speaking about your career, one of the other things I took away from the book, and it only came up in a headline today, Adam Screeney's out with an injury and it's related to overuse. So when we're talking about growth and development, there's another saying, if you're good enough, you're old enough. But I know from your underage career, you wanted to progress to the higher teams, and I agree. I think we need to play at a higher age group for us to develop the skills and the quickness, not only physically but mentally in terms of the game and your decision making. But how do you balance burnout, away from the kind of the physical injury point of view, but from a mental standpoint of the burnout that comes with maybe players progressing through age groups quickly and playing for multiple teams?
Yeah, it's a great question, Orla, and I think it is a big issue now where I'm seeing, multi-sports now, young kids maybe having to make a decision at 11, 12, 13 because all of a sudden the soccer team is training 3 times a week, their rugby team is training 3 times a week, their GA teams are doing the same, and poor young fellas and girls are jumping into cars doing double sessions in the evening and can be, doing 10 or 12 sessions a week and 2 or 3 matches, and it's not sustainable. And I used to give out to dad when he wouldn't let me play an age grade above me at different times or play 3 or 4 matches a week because I felt I was capable, and I was capable, but he was saying, like, where are you going to be when you're 17 or 18? You're going to be injured or else you're just going to hate the game, kind of thing. And he protected me at times from different teams and wouldn't allow me either train or play too far above my age grade, or you just need a break tonight even at your own age grade and you won't train but you'll play the match the weekend. And even at times in school as well, where I was having shin splints and pains in my knees and growing pains. I remember taking 3, 4 months out when we were in a very heavy period in second and third year in school. And again, that was dad's advice and trusting physios as well that, you're going to have a 20, 30 year career ahead of you here, this 2 or 3 months. Although you're missing a couple of schools matches and a couple of club matches, it's okay. And, I went cycling on a bike for the 3 months and doing anthem weight bearing I could just to stay active and training. But I think parents as well as coaches have to play the long game on this and say, okay, if I have a child here playing 3 sports a week, I should be happy enough them doing one training session for each sport and maybe a match in one of them in a week, and having at least a night, if not 2 nights off themselves where they're to be a kid, play with their friends, build a hut, jump off a wall, climb a tree, play their Xbox or whatever it might be, and sport will be there for them as well too. And I think anything else is probably you're pushing into that limit where all the figures around dropout are way too high, particularly in the females as well, 14, 15, 16. I think it's getting far too serious too soon. And the development piece, what sport is meant to be about, developing people personally, developing life skills. It's gone too much around, winning the competition and that success side of it. And, we all need to get back to what sport is about, giving people connection into a community, friendships into a community, the health and well-being side of it, and building confidence and competence through those aspects. So, the playing the game is one aspect of it, but it's really, really important that we don't give people that pressure that they feel they have to give up sport because they're feeling burnout already.
Yeah, everyone speaks about the dropout from kind of 13 to 16, as you mentioned. My big thing is I don't think we talk about the dropout from 18 to 21. And that's to me when you go to college, and sometimes college can make or break a player if they want to play elite level, but also you have different social pressures that you mightn't have had before. When we look at that age group, when you progress through, and for players and coaches that are listening that are maybe looking for progression or how to coach a player that wants to move to senior intercounty level, what's the most important attribute you need at senior intercounty level? And the answer might be different to what you maybe need at underage, but interested, what's the key thing from your mind?
Yeah, I think it's a lifestyle choice as much as anything. Like, you're going to have to say no in terms of those, social pressures in college. Obviously county players are in college as well, and they do have their downtimes in the winter and have their fun. But once the season kicks in terms of pre-season and stuff like that, there's a lot you'll have to say no to in terms of your Wednesday or Thursday nights, or whatever it might be in terms of J1s and other opportunities. And you know, I didn't do those things, and I don't regret it. I think I really enjoyed going into a senior setup at 19. It's what I always dreamed of. It's all what I always wanted. And, although there was challenges within it, for the most part, it was something that really added to my life and something I really enjoyed. So that attitude piece in terms of, you know, everything has to be really at a really high level in terms of your lifestyle, your sleep, your nutrition, reducing your alcohol intake, how you rest and recover between sessions, the gym side of it, and then how you're developing your game, both from a mental and tactical, technical side of it. So that takes time, it takes energy, it takes attention, but you do have to do it at that level if you want to, reach intercounty and if that's your dream and goal. And you can't maybe live the life of a college student or even a club player to an extent if you want to achieve that, and it has to be a lifestyle choice. And there's other vehicles for you to meet your friends, bar the alcohol side of it or whatever it might be, and you just have to find those interests and those groups that are doing those things outside of that vacuum, because you probably have to let certain friends go when you do make that choice. And other friends will come into your life that are on that same path as you, and they can be as good a relationships, if not better, in my experience.
In terms of identity as an athlete, when you're going through that phase of an intercounty career, and I spoke to Andy Moran about this, and we said, I can't remember the term he used. I think it was like football maniac or something. I forget the actual term. It'll come to me in a minute. But when you're looking at your identity and when you're in that phase of your intercounty career at senior level and challenging for All Ireland and All Stars and stuff, is your identity, when I ask what's your identity, is the first thing that pops to mind being a player in that?
Yeah,
In that,
yeah,
yeah.
I would have described myself as a Galway hurler. That's the long and short of it during that period of my life. And 4 out of 5 of my conversations were around that. And when people are in your friendship circle and introducing you, this is a Galway hurler, and that's what you would have heard, like, so it gets reinforced and validated a lot. And to create that separation, I think is really, really important, because you weren't born a Galway hurler, you weren't born an accountant, you weren't born a footballer or a camogie player. You were Orla, you were Tony, and in essence, there's way more to you, and your personality and your sense of self is way broader than that. Like, you are your thoughts, they're a part of your feelings, they're a part of your behaviors, they're a part of you. You are your imagination, you are your memory. There's a social side to you, there's an intellectual side to you, there's a mental side to you, there's a physical side to you in your appearance, and you have so much to give in terms of your personality as well. And then your roles in life, you can be a brother or a sister, you can be a sibling, you can be a mother or daughter or father or husband, you can be a work colleague, you can be a teammate. So your impact and the priorities you have in life and the meaning that you attach to each of those roles, are really, really important, because we can tie sometimes too much of our self-worth to, when I'm competent at football, I'm a competent person, or when I fail at that, I'm an incompetent person, and that's our worldwide view. But you can be successful in so many different ways, and whether it's through sport or music or your job, you just need to be careful that that's something you perform a role in, but it's not at the essence of who you are. And when we create that separation, it's kind of freeing and liberating for people to say, okay, it's like it'll come and go, like, and performance. We think we'll remember all these things forever, and people will remember that thing about us forever, but not really in my experience. They kind of come and go, these victories, very quickly, and quickly there's another young player that will be remembered after you, and there's probably only a few players that will be remembered for a lifetime, in fairness. So it's not to get tied up into these things or too worried about them.
What I talked to Andy about was putting football before everything else, and he made a point that you need maybe a couple of years of that to become one of the greats. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that, in terms of, like, if you want to get really good at something, there has to be, you know, I'm using the word obsession, but like, you have to really, really enjoy it, or really want to get better at it, and you're doing it from a healthy perspective, that you love and enjoy it, and you want to be the best you can be around that, not to be better than someone else or better than whatever it might be. I think that kind of healthy outlook on things is important. And to get up to that level of mastery and everything, it does take a tunnel vision and a focus and a work ethic that's probably a bit abnormal, that you wouldn't see in a lot of places. I know when you talk maybe outside of work, people work maybe 40 hours, but like, do they work like a player would at maybe, 20 hours a week at getting better at work, never mind just working in it. So that's what I'm talking about, where, you'd actually strategically do 20 hours a week extra to get better at your job. There are very few people that do that, but that's kind of the level, to get to a really, really high level, those kind of formative years, maybe 18 to 22. There's such a step now to get up to that level. It's going to take, really, really hard work in terms of your technique and your S&C and the mental side of it and the lifestyle side of it, to get to that level. And then after that, sustaining that too will take a certain level of focus as well, and maintenance of things.
See, that's the key. It's sustaining that, and people's, as he's mentioned, the formative years of 18 to 22. Generally, that's when most players are in college. But how do we keep? I like that when you're saying you're trying to master it. So when we're in that phase of mastering it, how do we keep it healthy, that it doesn't become an unhealthy obsession?
Yeah, I think, what we mentioned there, that sense of self, identifying what else is important to you in your life, your values. So it might be something like health, it might be around adventure, it might be around career, it might be around relationships. And just making sure I'm touching into those points consistently in the week, that it gives me a perspective, what we talk about in psychology, maybe a mental decompression from things or detachment from things is very, very healthy. And my own moral compass then as a person, like, if it's honesty or kindness or respect or commitment, how do I show that in other aspects of my life and bring that to the fore? That sport is a vehicle to build on those values, work is a vehicle to build on those values, meeting people for the first time or frequently is a chance to expose myself to using those values more and those character strengths, and just having a healthy sense of self, that I'm not just the I am a hurler or footballer, or I am an accountant, or I am a parent, that I try to build out that self complexity in terms of having multiple places where I can go and, have that same passion and enjoyment of those things, as well as, focusing in them as well in terms of a couple of goals outside of the main things for us.
So when we have a player that maybe doesn't have that awareness and that structure, maybe they haven't they haven't had the awareness to kind of go after it, and the time to put the work into that. When the bubble bursts, and Damien Lawler has a great book, it's called When the World Stops Watching, and I love that phrase. When the world stops watching and you don't have that set up around you, what do you do as an athlete?
Yeah, I probably only first experienced this at 24 when I got dropped from the county team, and I was let go from the accountancy in terms of failing my exams, was unqualified and was unemployed, and the questions that kind of come up, well, who am I now? I'm not a Galway senior hurler, I'm not an accountant, and they're probably two of those senses of self I built myself off. And you probably have to look deeper then and say, right, like, what do I want for my life at this point? Do I want to be a successful accountant? Do I want to be a Galway hurler again? And the answer at that point in my life was yes. So, start putting plans in place in terms of design a routine that would allow that to happen in terms of accountancy, designing a routine and a daily process that would help that to happen again in terms of my hurling, and looking at other aspects of my life then in terms of friendships and traveling, adventure, and learning more about myself and the world. I think was really, really important things. So that sense of purpose and meaning for yourself, like, what matters now that I'm not a hurler, what matters now that I'm not an accountant, and how do I want to make a difference in the world? What impact do I want to have? And, how can I apply maybe the lessons that I've had in life so far, from business or sport or whatever it might be, to, shape the next 12 months or the next 12 weeks of my life, and go after the things that matter to me. So I think having someone to stand back and ask those questions and ask those deeper questions, which why am I here? What do I stand for? What are my dreams and goals now and aspirations? I think it's really, really important that you kind of seek out and ask that help. And, you don't have to have all the answers now or ever. Like, it's constantly evolving. We're constantly evolving as human beings, but something that just gives your life a bit of direction and meaning at this point is very, very important.
Is that what we're missing? Like, we see all the, we're training obviously on the pitch and in the gym, and skill acquisition, nutrition, psychology, but even away from that, and just going back to you as a person. And I said in a podcast I was recording with Jackie Hurley yesterday, and I said I'd love the coaches, the players I coach, to achieve all they want in a sporting context, but I'd love for them to be more than just an athlete. Is that what we're currently lacking, or is there something else that we haven't, or not coaching kids, or as in kids, I mean teenagers progressing through the ranks?
Yeah, I think there's a need in an environment, whether you want to call it a mentor or a performance psychologist, whatever, or even a coach to, right, say every 3 or 4 sessions here, we're going to sit in a circle in the pitch and we're actually going to say, Orla, tell me a bit about yourself and your family and your background and what your dreams and aspirations are. Or what's the thing that you're struggling with at the moment? And I don't want to hear anything about a sports context at the moment. I want to hear about you and your life and other things you're interested in. And having that kind of relationship, building peace with peers and teammates that you maybe share a lot of time with, but maybe don't know anything about it on a personal level. And I think sport going back to that and society going back to that, where, people feel that they really belong and they fit in and feel supported by others. You kind of have to know a bit of each other's personal background and context and history to understand each other and understand what each other's pressure points are and what your ambitions are and your goals and dreams as well. And, that opens up other conversations then through the season and helps us have perspective when we're maybe facing what's perceived pressure in terms of a county semi-final or final, when we know other people in the group are dealing with a mental health issue or a sick parent or a sick child or or after being let go from a job, etc. And it just puts things in perspective for everyone. Like, there's bigger things. We need to support each other here as a group rather than win or losing a match. And I think getting back to that, informal chats and informal conversations. And what COVID has done poorly, I suppose, is that people maybe don't go into dressing rooms and have those chats anymore. They're getting into their cars, going to train and getting into the car again and going home. And maybe go back to environment again, or there isn't those places for that informal interactions on a consistent basis prior to and after training. So I think we maybe need to design them again or create them again within our training curriculum to allow those deeper conversations and getting to know each other at a deeper level, because a pillar of well-being again is social connection. So we're all wired for that, so we've got to maybe create that more than just playing and doing our run and drills and our gym and our skill acquisition or whatever it might be.
What's the other pillars of well-being? You mentioned that one there.
Yeah, I suppose a friend would have recommended to me how to frame this better, because it's called Perma V, but he calls it the revamp method. So relationships been one of them, engagement as in, activities that you're really passionate and enjoy, and you kind of go into flow state and forget like time absorption and flow and effortless around it. The vitality side of it, so our energy, so things like good new proper nutrition, sleep, rest and recovery, exercise and movement, and those aspects. The achievement side of it, not just from a sports perspective, that we're giving ourselves credit in terms of passing exams or learning something new on a daily basis, or walking 5K today, or walking or exercising it and writing that down and acknowledging it. The meaning side of it, so at different times sport has a different meaning for us. When we're younger, it's about fun and enjoyment. It might become some of that when we're in our 20s, but it might change to more winning and success and outcome focus. The meaning of our jobs, is it create financial independence for us? Is it to create more wealth? Is it to create a positive impact in society? Um, so that's another important part, the meaning of what we do and the meaning of what life is for us and the meaning of relationships, the meaning of activities. And then the last piece then is positive emotions, and you're trying to work off a space where we're focused on the things that we have rather than what we don't have, and gratitude practices. We're involved in things that are challenging but rewarding. We're enthusiastic and energized about the things we are doing in terms of, whether it's work or sport or whatever it might be. So they would be from positive psychology, really important pillars in terms of well-being, and it's trying to nourish aspects of that on a daily and weekly basis to make sure that we're, satisfied within our lives and feeling good in ourselves as well, which is an important component of it.
I heard Aisling Hanley speak after DC won the O'Connor Cup, and she said the reason why she plays is her family. What was the reason why you played when you were at the peak of your powers?
Yeah, on writing my book, I suppose you do reflect back on it. The first part I never really considered why I was playing, but the second part of my Galway career was very much around trying to inspire the next generation within my club. them within the county, that they could too, reach their goals and ambitions and become a Galway hurler or become the best version themselves. So, I think, just bringing joy and happiness to my community and my family and my friends was a really important part of it. And having great memories with my teammates as well in Grove Park and other venues and training as well was important aspect. So it was generally around inspiring others, generally around bringing joy and enjoyment to other people and, creating memories. They'd probably be the three most important whys for me of why I was doing it.
In terms of reflecting, because the book is also reflects on your career, when you look through, I love asking guests the biggest lesson they learned from sport, and you've kind of touched on it there, but did it change from before writing the book till after, or was it kind of reinforcing what you already knew?
You definitely go deeper on topics like when you're writing a book because you're trying to give as much value to the reader and give as many relatable stories that would line up to that idea or concept and the practices that maybe helped me through it. And when you do look back and you have to give people advice, what you did when you lost your job or you lost your position on the squad, like things like process versus outcome or courage versus fear were very relevant towards that. And, clarity versus confusion in terms of shifting my identity away from the Galway senior hurler to what am I now and the same around accountancy. So, they're probably the main lessons in those first two or three chapters that, I think were very, very relevant that gave me a foundation to bounce back from obvious, very strong setbacks for me in my 20s and, bounce back in a healthy way rather than, staying stuck and feeling helpless maybe and been in, a victim mode.
When you look through the players that you've worked with and the teams you've worked with, and you heard me ask this question to Jerry Hussey the other night, when we look at separating the best from the rest, what is it? What's the pattern or the attribute that you've noticed the most?
From an individual basis, I would say the best performers are very, very authentic in themselves. I think they've reached a level of, I suppose, mastering themselves in terms of their sport, and they're at a place of just really kind of trusting that ability and allow it to come out. So I think that would be the individual thing I see, and there's a great trust in their ability and a great trust in themselves that they can execute these things at a really high level, whether it's a skill or a moment for the team to help it realize its potential. And then on a team level, wouldn't be too far from Jerry's piece there. I think that connection to the greater good, the cause of the team, that connection to your teammates, that connection to who you're playing for and why. I think that's really, really important to talk about as a group and be really aligned and motivated by. And, it is love. Like, you have a love for your teammates, you have a love for the jersey, you have a love for your place, you have a love for being successful with that group, and you love playing the sport or doing that thing as well. And, I think when you're tied into trusting yourself and loving what you're doing, you're on the right path to enjoying the journey as much as possible. Like,
When you look at the teams you've worked with as well, am I right in thinking the first All Ireland winning side was it Galway minor?
yeah, Galway minor,
Yeah,
I'd say 2015. Yeah, was my first
yeah.
kind of um role, I suppose. Yeah, in the areas of sports and performance psychology. Yeah,
When you look back to then and look at your practice now, what's the biggest evolution?
great question. I suppose after 10 years working in this space, I think I probably come to a place of really n knowing what I'm good at and knowing what I need to get better at. I think is really, really important. When I stepped into performance psychology for the first time, I was totally new to that, and I was very, very lucky to have Jerry Hussey to mentor me from, very first year really at it and continuing to do so. And I think that helps accelerate my progression. But I'm still trying to evolve as a practitioner as well, no more than I did as a player and get better at it. And leaning on professionals, be it David McHugh at the moment and working towards, being a certified mental performance consultant or, in time getting better as a practitioner as well. I think there's always stuff we can learn in terms of mental health side of it. I can get better at it. The well-being side of it, I can get better at it. Understanding, the culture and environment and how to design environments better. There's always room for improvement, Orla. So, I just think it's that open mindset is probably the biggest thing that I hope I'll always continue to have, even from year one starting out to year 10 now that, I don't feel I'm ever the expert in the room. And, I would feel individuals and teams know themselves far better than I ever will. And, if I can add value in terms of helping them a bit along the way, that's what I hope to do and learn as much off them as I'm learning myself. So I think it's open-mindedness just to continue to be curious to things. I think it's vital really.
When I look at the Ballygunner team, Dan Glynn, I was at the Meath GA coaching workshop, it was brilliant, and Dan Glynn shared a great clip of a substitute coming on to scoring and scored a goal in the last play of the game. But there's a backstory to that, and I'd love you to enlighten us on it.
Yeah, I suppose like when you look at trying to build an identity in a team and you're looking at what would be something that would give a team an edge, one of the things we consistently talked about was been maybe ruthlessly composed as a group in Ballygunner and how we wanted to be in those clutch moments going into games and those key behaviors that we worked on and off the field in terms of being composed, whether it was refocusing routines, whether it was breath work, whether it was meditation, that was all kind of building into being a ruthlessly composed player in those kind of pressure moments. And obviously having an optimistic mindset in those situations and looking for the opportunity and possibility. So what, we're 2 points down, you know, we could win this by three, we could win this by four, we could win this by five, and the game isn't over till it's over. Like, and I think Harry would be an embodiment of that in terms of he hadn't played in the semi-final. He played in the Munster Championship up to that alright as a sub, and but he still felt coming into that game he had prepared and as hard as someone that was starting, he was as ready as anyone was starting, and he felt he was going to go in and make a huge impact in terms of that team and that situation. And no better man than in those positions to be composed and have the skill set he has in terms of, left and right as an unbelievable shot on him. And, when he took on that run up the middle and, finished that chance, I think it was, such a powerful moment to live with us for the rest of our days. But, even the build up to that in terms of how lads stayed composed, they didn't go lamping high ball into the edge of the square and hoping for the best. They played three or four passes around the middle, found the gap of space through the channel of centre back, and Harry found 30 or 40 yards of space then after breaking the first tackle and got into within a scoring position, which maybe 9 times out of 10 players wouldn't have shot from 25 yards out, but he saw the gap rather than the obstacle and went forward and executed really well and created the next bit of history for Ballygunner and been the first team from Waterford to win All Ireland club and in All Ireland I think, and for the first time for the club as well to break that monkey was a really special moment for us all to be a part of. And if we played a bit of part in that, myself and Jerry, we definitely take credit for it, but there's so much more other variables in it, Orla, and the coaching team that was there with David Franks and Shay and Dara managing it, the playing ability of the players as well, and just the environment and culture that they created throughout the club for decades at this stage. It was just great to see some of that come to fruition on the biggest day.
Mm. When we speak about winning All Ireland, what does it really take? Like, you've been behind the scenes with a couple of groups. For those that don't have the insight, like, what does it really take to get over the line?
Yeah, you never really know what others are doing, like, but I would think it takes an unbelievable level of discipline to do what you need to do for sometimes 2, 3, 4 years at a time. And that might be 11 and a half, 12 months of a year where, you're living a really consistent lifestyle in terms of nutrition, sleep, recovery, meditation, visualization, whatever it might be, you decide is your, bedrock of preparation for that. The S&C side of it, that there's a really consistent plan and program there on the field, that you're developing a style of play and coaching and competencies in each individual player. There's a consistency there around how honest you are in terms of are we doing these things or not. There's a consistency and honesty around your performance levels. Are we hitting our KPIs or not? And if not, why not? And what do we need to address in terms of whether it's an attitude thing or a behavior thing or a skill deficit we need to work on? And there needs to be huge honesty around those things. And when we are hitting the mark, that we're giving ourselves credit for that and reinforcing it and building confidence. And when we're not personalizing it, we're just seeing it as part of performance and part of the process journey and getting back and working more smartly with more quality around these things. So you just need a huge collective buy-in from, the top of the club or the top of the county board down to the players and management. And, you need everyone trying to move the dial and the needle 1% and 2% every day to get better. And one or two people will fall off at different times, and you try to bring them back and get them back to the standard that's there. And you address the things that need to be addressed that high performing teams do to be successful, if this is the thing we want to be successful at. And is this thing going to move us forward or is it going to move us back? And they're the decisions you've got to make, probably most moments of the day and most moments of the week. And it's not for everyone, but I think it's entirely worth it, and it's entirely enjoyable when you do go on that same wavelength and that same journey together, and everyone's, thinking the same way, feeling the same way about it, and behaving the same way about it, and in that kind of bubble together and doing it together, it's very special.
When we look at the groups that you've been involved with and the amount of finals you've been in, I asked Shane Hassett about managing. Actually, he gave me a better term. It was like the cauldron of, or the signs of Croke Park. But when you look at the signs of All Ireland finals and managing that, and even you spoke about it in the book about trying to manage it yourself as a player, what are the better techniques that you've seen around managing it? Because you're not just managing the game, you're managing all the other stuff that happens outside.
Yeah, and I think everyone needs support around that, whether it's the club or the management team. There's a lot of hysteria and external interest when you get to a final, be it from media sources or, parents and the general club as well. It's huge, and they all feel a part of that success and want everyone to be successful. So I think there has to be a selfishness and part of the management team and the players that, our role and focus should be on things like our preparation and our performance. And, you probably have to be selfish in terms of your time and where you're putting it in terms of those couple of weeks leading into it. Otherwise, energy can be taken away, focus can be taken away, and distractions can take over. And if you've one person to five people distracted by what's happening after the final, or things that aren't part of that preparation that's going to move the needle, then you're probably in trouble before you even arrive at the venue. So there takes a lot of organization behind the scenes, both in terms of routines leading up to it, where you're training, how you're managing the players' energy, how you're managing distraction, the day of it as well, in terms of where you go and where you don't go, and managing the different build-ups in terms of Crow Park and All Ireland finals. You're out in the pitch longer. There's parades. There's meeting the presidents. So there's lots of factors to consider, and he's trying to take as much away as that from the players, that they have the energy to put into their own performance and their own preparation. And the same with the management, that someone logistically is taking care of a lot of those things, that they can just focus on preparing the team as well as possible and getting them ready for the challenge of the opposition as well. So yeah, there's a lot of ingredients that have to go right within it to try and bring your best performance.
One of the other things you mentioned in the book was being dropped from the panel and being informed by a letter from the county board. And I heard James Horan speaking on the Irish Examiner Gaelic Football podcast about the language and you use and how to manage dropping a player, whether it's from a squad or from the starting 15. From your perspective as a player and also your role now, what advice do you give a manager on having that conversation?
Yeah, I think he has to have credible sources in terms of where the decision is coming from. So, having some stats and numbers in terms of where that player is at physically, in terms of his gym scores or running capability, would be important facet, and you're giving him some takeaways there in terms of what he's doing well and what he can improve on. From a mental side of it, what you've seen in terms of his attitude since he came in the group, the good and the bad maybe, what you notice when what happens and when he's maybe up against better players or more difficult challenges and situations, and where he can improve. What his confidence is like, his concentration, his emotional control in situations. from a tactical, technical then around his role, what he's good at, maybe what his limitations are, and things he could go back to his club or her could go back to her club to work on. And I think given some clarity around those things and having credible sources that you can go to saying, right, I view this player, I've seen him in training matches and challenge matches the last couple of weeks. This is my take and my perspective and, my lens and how I see it. And asking your other coaches as well, do they have that perception or what is their perception or is there something I'm missing? Because we all have blind spots and we all look for different things. So having those couple of credit sources that can maybe back up your data to a point as well as maybe challenge some of your data and saying, are we making the right decision here as well? And, if you're kind of clear then in terms of, this is the right call at the moment. I have, three similar people in that position and they're ahead of that person and that's the role that I need filled. Well, then, you can go to that player in a much stronger position in terms of what you want to get across. And I think it's to document your position, be clear on what's been good, but also clear on what they need to improve on. And, the door isn't closed if they go back to their club and work on these things. It could be a matter of weeks, it could be a matter of months before they get that opportunity again. And, try to leave it in good terms in terms of understanding what the player took from the session and, what they're going to do next, I suppose, after receiving this information. And, having someone in the setup to maybe check in with that player in, 2 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time and making sure that maybe they have some resource or support that they might need outside of the county setup to keep them progressing and making sure that they feel that they're still a part of it in some way and still in the thought process.
Before we move on to the sideline 7, I wanted to throw a kind of a scenario at you for a player, and I don't think this player would listen, but maybe a parent or somebody that they know. When you've got a player that, let's say, they were quite a good player all the way up and they're probably, let's say, 16, 17 now. It could be any age, but that sort of piece where you're probably progressing to county squads and, because you're good, you're on every team and everyone wants you to play. There's a bit of social pressure and your family are then involved because I find if you're a good player, your family are always there. And then if you're always there, you get roped into doing something. So whether there's your parents are in the executive at the club or you have an older sibling on the county team or something like that, but the player in question is falling out of love with the sport, is what advice do you give that athlete that isn't finding the joy in it anymore?
Yeah, I think first off, you probably have to look at, what's causing that issue. Is it something in the environment, whether, there's a relationship conflict there with the manager or coach or a teammate that might be causing that lack of enjoyment? Is it something themselves in terms of, they're just tired or under stress or fatigued at the moment from training, their schedule, etc. And that definitely happens to players at different times. So they might just need a mental break for, 3 to 5 days or even a weekend can maybe be an awful difference in terms of rejuvenating them more as well, and just a break from the setup and the environment and the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or whatever it might be, and just constantly thinking about it. So those short-term breaks can be very, very beneficial. And then, it's just going back to revisiting them, like why did they start sport in the first place, and what are they focused on now, and could they go back to some of those mottos in terms of enjoy the friendships, enjoy the training aspect of getting better, enjoy the challenge of matches, and maybe now I'm focused in on, impressing someone or proving something to someone or winning more than, my development or enjoyment. So, there are kind of some perspectives I think would be important to go through with that person before they make a decision. And very often it can be just a conversation that helps move the dial, or it can be, a sharp break away from that environment that just helps them, or maybe it's something they need to resolve with a coach or a teammate that will allow them to enjoy the environment a bit more. So there'll be just some perspectives I've seen maybe from my own work that, are important to go through with the player because, when we're fatigued or we're frustrated, sometimes we don't make clear decisions and we need to get to the bottom of what's causing that fatigue or what's causing that frustration. And, when we can free people up from that, then they become clearer in their thinking and, their perspectives kind of shifts and they're a bit more, thinking from their rational, logical mind. And, we're probably making better decisions when we're there 9 times out of 10.
Brilliant. I'm going to move on to the sideline 7. It's the same 7 questions at the end of every episode. Tony, what's your favourite quote?
I am enough, I have enough, and I do enough.
Brilliant. Who's that from?
myself because I used to use that in my 20s because, you're after putting in all the preparation, you're going out in an All-Ireland final in Croke Park, and to reinforce to myself, regardless of what happens today, I am enough as a person. It just helped me to feel a sense of control and certainty in myself at that time. I have enough was a reference to I have the skills and abilities here to perform today, and I do enough now is probably something I've added on the last while that, you're always wanting to improve, but there's only a certain amount of hours in the day, and you do enough in terms of, I work hard at my profession, I work hard at being a dad and other aspects, and there is only a certain amount of time in the day, and you kind of have to say, okay, I've done enough today. Let's relax, park it, and tomorrow will be another opportunity again. So that's an affirmation I find that works for me in terms of settling myself again when I get anxious around things or worried about things.
Brilliant. Question 2, best sporting event you've been to?
Um, yeah, I think Ballygunner's All Ireland is the one that stands out most recent. I tend to park things quite quickly, or from even my own playing career, and I don't stay it's too long in the moments, but that's definitely one that stands out for me at the moment. Yeah.
Biggest setback or challenge so far in your career, and how did you react to it?
Been unemployed and losing my Galway career at 24 were probably those two that I've mentioned a lot in media and in the book as well. And didn't react well to it in the first month or two, but I think I responded very well post that, and that allowed me to get employed again and get back on the county squad and have 4 or 5 more years there as well. So that's one I'm particularly proud of in my 20s. And as you move through life, there's always other challenges. We had a fairly personal fire in my family home about a year and a half ago as well. So I had to deal with that. I suppose and mum and dad have made a great recovery out of it, but you just don't know what will come and what life will throw at you at different times.
Mm. On the flip side, then, your biggest achievement on or off the pitch?
Um, Getting married, I think, and hopefully raising 3 kids quite well, even though you do doubt yourself.
Brilliant. Looking back, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Ask for more help and open up around what you're struggling with, be it from a sports context or a work context. I think I at times probably tried to figure it out too much myself, and when I share with others as I got better at it, you don't need to know it all, and people are better at certain things, and they can be great advice for you to move through things quicker rather than thinking you have to figure it all out yourself.
Question 6, who would be your dream dinner guest and why?
Um, my wife, obviously.
Good answer. Last question before I let you go. If your life was a book, which it kind of is, what chapter would this be called?
Great question. The next opportunity.
Brilliant. The next opportunity. If someone's listening and wants to get in touch or read the book, where is the best place to get in touch or buy the book itself?
Yeah, I have a website, tonyogregan.ie, and all my socials are at Tony Óg Regan, so I'm quite easy to track down.
Brilliant. And I'll be sure to link that all in the episode description as well. Tony, thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to seeing what the next opportunity is.
Thanks, Orla. Thanks a million.